G'day, I'm Professor Joseph Drew and I'm here to talk to you about the very sad things that have happened to the community of Cootamundra-Gundagai based on really bad advice, based on really bad decision making, and based on ignoring expert evidence that was presented to these decision makers. It's a very sad case. Unfortunately, it's all too common in Australian local government. I just want people to be aware of the suffering this community is going through so that we understand why we need to start listening to real experts, ignoring self-professed experts, and doing our homework so we can get better outcomes for communities. So the state of play prior to the May 2016 forced amalgamation, these two communities were two separate local governments, and they'd been assessed by T-Corp as moderately sustainable. They both received the same evaluation. Now, I'm not a fan of T-Corp's work. I've criticised it in academic literature, and it's gone through the blind review process, which suggests lots of academics are not a fan of its work either. However, T-Corp, the evaluations done by T-Corp is the only real evidence we can point to. It's the evidence the state government were basing decisions on, so it's reasonable to talk about it. So what did moderate mean? According to T-Corp, a moderately sustainable local government had an adequate capacity to meet its financial commitments in the short to medium term and an acceptable capacity in the long term. That was the state of play in 2015 prior to these amalgamations. Now, late December 2015, the Minister for Local Government in the New South Wales state government, it was a Liberal National Party government, where Premier Baird proposed amalgamating these two communities. And it was really interesting because Cootamundra, when it was doing a voluntary amalgamation program, had actually proposed to get together with Hardin, which is their near neighbour, where they were already sharing a lot of resources and had a lot of collaborations involved. And the government surprised everyone by all of a sudden proposing this amalgamation with Gundagai, which had never been on the radar screen. Didn't make any much sense if you know the two communities of Gundagai and Cootamundra. For starters, they're very different communities. Second, there's not even a single direct major road that connects the two communities. You have to get onto the highway, then get off the highway onto a goat track and drive many kilometres before you get to Cootamundra. It was never going to work. It was just crazy stuff. Why you wouldn't let Cootamundra get together with Hardin? They wanted to get together with Hardin. Similar communities, a lot closer. Direct road between the two places is absolutely beyond me. A lot of people suggested this was political payback on Gundagai for bucking the system, and it's hard to disagree with those sorts of suggestions. Anyway, KPMG did some analysis for the state government, and that was used in the minister's proposal, and they claimed that they would save $3 million over 20 years. They'd streamline senior management roles, saving $4 million. They'd redeploy back office and administrative functions, saving $3 million, and they would have efficiencies through increased purchasing power of $500,000. Now, that was the proposal. That's what the state government sold this to the community on. They overrid the community's objections. As I said, Cootamundra wanted to get with Hardin and Gundagai wanted to stay alone. And T-Corp said they were both moderately sustainable. Now, I must disclose here, I did some work for Gundagai when they were independent council. They reached out to me and got expert advice, and I did sophisticated empirical analysis showing that the proposal would probably result in diseconomies of scale between 10 and 12%, i.e. their costs would go up as a result of the amalgamation. And sadly, my work was very accurate, unlike the work of KPMG, the Office of Local Government, IPART, Ernst & Young, and all other people in the Independent Local Government Review Panel. Let's not forget the people who started this mess, who all said that it was a wonderful idea. Okay, to give you an idea of the scale of what went wrong here for this poor community, what I've done is extracted some figures from the audited financial statements for Cootamundra in blue there, and Gundagai in orange. And all I've done is added up those total expenditure figures to give us a total for the combined level, and that's in the grey line there. And I've gone several years prior to the amalgamations. The amalgamations happened in 2016. And what I suggest is that we can reasonably compare the last couple of financial years prior to amalgamation with the last couple financial years since the amalgamation. Probably not that first year because there was extra costs. We'd expect extra costs. Now, looking at that graph, you can see that costs have increased by about $10 million. These are in thousands of dollars as a result of the amalgamation, or certainly subsequent to the amalgamation. And I've repeated this exercise with employee costs. Remember, according to KPMG and the Boundaries Commission, most of the savings were going to be in employee costs. So the amalgamations happened in 2016. Let's have a look at the total employee costs a few years prior to the amalgamations. And let's have a look at the total employee costs several years after the amalgamations, and you can see they've easily increased by more than $2 million. So the savings just aren't there, which wasn't a terrible surprise to me because at the time I had presented evidence from the Queensland amalgamation showing that staff costs had not decreased as a result of the amalgamation, so I didn't expect them to that to happen in the New South Wales amalgamations either. And a lot of you recall a lot of the rhetoric about the New South Wales amalgamations was about bigger councils being more efficient. So let's measure efficiency. The dark blue line here is Cootamundra-Gundagai. I've combined their figures for the years prior to amalgamation, which are these years here, and then we've looked at the Cootamundra-Gundagai entity following amalgamation. And you can see that we've gone from around average efficiency. Now, efficiency in economics terms is a conversion of inputs, staff and money, into outputs, all the things that local governments produce. So we've gone from about average down to that bottom quartile, so below the lowest 25% of councils in the state for quite some time. And this is comparing them against all the councils in New South Wales. So why was the Cootamundra-Gundagai amalgamations such a disaster? Why is the community suffering so much? They've just had a 53.5% tax increase that follows on from significant increases to all their fees and charges from the previous year. And these things are necessary. IPART agrees. They confirmed the rate increase. These things are necessary to keep this council solvent as a result of the amalgamation. And that was the proposal put to the IPART, and that's what IPART agreed with. Well, the community is suffering for the same reason as amalgamations often don't work. People failed to do their homework. We failed to engage bona fide experts. We had the commercial consulting companies in Sydney involved. We had independent local government review panels that didn't have the relevant and required expertise to do the work. We didn't listen to real experts. I was doing work for Gundagai prior to the amalgamations. I showed that costs would go up. I was ignored. The Boundaries Commission delegate and the Boundaries Commission ignored my testimony and preferred to put full emphasis on the work of KPMG. Work, I might note, that has always remained secret. The government, even in court, wasn't prepared to provide the full documentation produced for them by KPMG. So secret report is behind all this work. We failed to listen to the community. People in Gundagai and Cootamundra knew this wasn't going to work. And in fact, they said it. Unfortunately, we had rather sham public consultations and people were restricted to only speaking for a maximum of 3 minutes, and a lot of people weren't even given the opportunity to speak at these so-called public inquiries into the amalgamation. But the far majority of people were saying, look, we know it won't work. There's not even a direct road accessing the two communities. They're a long distance away. They're very different communities with very different needs and capacities. It just won't work. And they were ignored, just like I was ignored. We failed to acknowledge harmonisation costs, and I specifically brought this up for the Gundagai Council submission to the Boundaries Commission, that there would be significant harmonisation costs. We came up with examples, and the rubbish bin ones I've talked about in other videos was also the case here. Different number of bins and pickup times. Once you become one council, people naturally expect to receive the same services. You go up to the higher level of services, costs go up. And most importantly for this Cootamundra-Gundagai Council, people failed to acknowledge the cost of distance. To drive from Gundagai to Cootamundra is about 45 minutes. When people are driving equipment or staff from one place to another, you're paying them not to work, to sit in the car instead of working. And all those 45-minute trips add up the wear and tear on vehicles, the fuel, and the wear and tear on people. It's a long drive, it's not a very good road, and it really wears on people having to drive between those two council centres all the time. So in summary, the poor community of Cootamundra and Gundagai, lovely people. I've spent quite a bit of time there. My heart goes out to you. I tried to warn people not to do this, and I produced robust empirical work to show them that it was going to be a disaster. I was ignored. My heart really goes out to you. I know you're suffering a lot, and I know there's lots of rural communities around the state suffering as a result of these amalgamations. This is a really good case study of what goes wrong, and what goes wrong is that people don't get rural communities, and people don't do their homework. And I just wish that the architects of these failed amalgamations would watch this video, search your soul and think, look, I've got to do better next time, because it's just not fair to do these sorts of things to people. Thank you very much for your time.